And hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Pumpkin Copter Cast, a good old podcast about video games. Today, I am joined by Cam Riach of Studio Serenity Forge, and today we'll be chatting about their game King's Bird. So, hello, Cam.
All right.
So, I'll start with the basic, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a associate producer and designer here at Serenity Forge, which means I do some level design and mechanic designs for various projects, and then handle some more of like the production and project management aspects of other projects.
Okay. So, yeah, how were you first exposed to video games?
Pretty early. I'm the youngest of four, and so we usually had at least one console growing up between me and my brothers. So just grew up playing a lot of Nintendo and Super Mario Bros. And Smash and kind of like JRPGs over the course of like PS2 era, and just I don't know, been playing games most of my life, and then kind of transitioned into making them eventually.
Okay, so similar to the question I just asked, what made you want to go into like game design and just working in a job that involves video games?
Yeah, I actually like kind of was like a dream job to go into games, and then late into when I was in college, like in my last year or so, one of my older brothers had actually already started working in the industry, and wanted to know if I was interested in doing some QA or quality assurance work for his company on their game. And I jumped at the opportunity and learned a lot just interning for that studio, and eventually getting hired to do some QA for them full time while I was still in school, and just kind of picked up a lot of things from there and started to teach myself various design practices and how to work in Unity and some other engines. And yeah.
Okay, so what exactly is the King's Bird?
So the Kingsbird is a momentum-based precision platformer with kind of a more subtle like narrative behind that, where we tried to use as much as possible a wordless narrative and purely through visuals.
Mm-hmm.
But the main crux of the Kingsbird is balancing the player's ability to use precision-based like platforming involving jumps and wall jumps and slides, as well as something I think is pretty unique, which is just using the momentum of falling and limited flight to kind of pass obstacles.
Okay. So you just mentioned that it's a momentum-based platform, and now as someone who literally knows nothing about making games, could you explain to me what that means?
Yeah, so like the a lot of the game's mechanics and design kind of revolve around us simulating a sense of like gravity and speed
Mm-hmm.
towards falling and like air resistance a little bit. So, for example, in the Kingsbird, if you need to get to a higher ledge in some levels, you'll actually have to drop, like jump off another ledge and drop so that you can gain as much speed from falling, and then use your flight to swing yourself back up in the air. A lot of the puzzles revolve around the player being familiar with not only their sense of flight with like our the ability that we give the player, but also the weight of the character and how to gain momentum in their flight and off of jumps.
Okay, then. So I've noticed when I looked at the trailer is, one of the ways I just discover games is pretty much just like the way I discovered Kingsbird was a thing was I oftentimes in between like big gaming conventions I pretty much just Google lists of like indie games because I inevitably miss several. But I noticed that in the trailer it had quite a unique visual style. So, what what inspired you to make the King's Bird look like how it is?
Yeah, so the pretty much almost all, like the art direction in general is uh, very like we're very indebted to our art director, who is also one of the lead designers and producers on the project, Kirsty, who uh, she said before that the art style was kind of inspired by like Mayan influences, actually, which you don't often see, I think, in games or other media that much. Um, but also just creating like these beautiful, like almost like mural or tapestry like backgrounds with like keeping the player somewhat minimalist, but still making sure that that Quill, who's the player's character, is visible when you have to, as a player, perform some of the more extreme platforming challenges. So ideally, that the art could grab people that weren't necessarily huge fans of precision platformers, but just also fans of great looking games. So.
Okay. So yeah, and I noticed that like the characters on screen and a lot of this scenery seems to be almost silhouetted. I assume that's just to make sure that the players don't get distracted by any of the scenery like while they're actually playing the game, even though it looks really, really good, and that they can just focus purely on whatever platforming they have to do like at that moment.
Yeah, I think there's a variety of reasons, but that is a good one in that at some points in this game during some of the challenges, the player is moving pretty quickly through these levels, but you want the visuals and the background of what they're going through to be bold enough and like easily identifiable enough that you can still appreciate the general scenery that you're passing.
Okay. And you mentioned a bit earlier that this game is either going to be entirely wordless or like as wordless as you can get away with. So, why did you decide to have a almost entirely dialogueless narrative in The King's Bird?
I think a lot of it was the original direction of the project. I came on kind of later during the project and around like the last year of the production, when it was really ramping up. But I think that was always originally part of the design and the DNA of the game. Is just a lot of platformers don't necessarily traditionally like have narratives that are like a huge component of what players go to them for. That's been changing obviously with games like Ori and like other similar indie titles that are starting to put more narrative focus into like platformers as a genre. But I think we just wanted to experiment with how much we can tell the player visually by what they're doing and what they're seeing, rather than us directly telling them what's happening. So.
Okay. And without giving away any of the good bits of the game, Can you give us like a rundown as to like what's happening in the game's narrative, like once the player gets it started?
Without giving too much away, it's mostly that you play as, we never actually give her name in the game, but you play as a character that we call Quill, who is a young woman who is trying to escape kind of her somewhat like caged existence, and finds this ability that gives her the power of flight, and how she goes off and explores the world that she's never seen before, really, with this new power.
Okay, so what again, without giving away anything too good, like how will the game, like you mentioned that it has flight and that you're using falling and the player's momentum in order to get to some difficult areas, but what other types of mechanics can be expected from the game?
So we like to give the player like pretty much all the mechanics, like very early on, so that they can learn to increase their own skill with how they use them, and then test their like what they've learned kind of over time, through various challenges in our level design. Um, so a lot of the game's mechanics revolve around almost chaining together your skill base of types of your jumps and your kind of like slide, like floor slides and various other maneuvers that you can use to quickly build up speed, as you go through various like kind of gaps or environmental, like level design based challenges. So a big thing that we've seen is actually some pretty dedicated speedrunners who have just completely blown our staff's fastest times in the game out of the water by just figuring out like incredibly clever ways to like find the most efficient way of running through a level as fast as possible. So I think it was just very encouraging to see people kind of master our own mechanics better than us and show us like creative ways of even using the mechanics that we designed that we never even would have thought of to beat some of these levels.
Sounds like this would be a good game for the people who do awesome games done quick to get a hold of.
Yeah, hopefully.
So, yeah. So it's time for the question that everyone understands perfectly and no one ever is confused by even a little bit. In your opinion on a professional worker honor of video games is video games?
Is video games. Definitely not confused. Is video games? I will say yes. Video games is.
Okay, then. So, yeah, so once everyone who's interested in it has bought and played through it and sped run and destroyed the Kingsbird, are there any other genres that Serenity Forge is interested in working on somewhere down the road?
Yeah, we're actually, the way our company is structured is very interesting in that pretty much anyone in our company can pitch something to the rest of the team. No matter if you're like in art or programming or production or design, If you think like it's a good idea, no matter the genre, we'll usually take a look at it. If it sounds good and most of the team is interested, we'll go for it. So right now we're kind of experimenting with a variety of different stuff that we can't really talk about right now, but yeah, we're pretty open to a variety of different things. And even going back to even before I joined the company, like when I was looking at the company, it was just impressive to me the differences in genres of what the studio had done before, where there was like they had done a puzzle based game and they'd done a strictly narrative based game even before they did Kingsbury, which is a hardcore platformer. So I think we're pretty open to almost any genre, and we've got some cool things that we're experimenting with right now.
Okay, so the Kingsbird is currently out on Steam. Are there plans to bring it to like any console in the future? And if so, are there any consoles the team has their eyes on?
No official announcement just yet, but we've got some pretty cool plans for the Kingsburg coming up. So I'd just say keep your eyes open.
All right, then. So, and like the last official question that I always enjoy hearing from anyone. So, in your opinion, like, why do you think video games are important, both as like an artistic medium to experiment with and as like a form of entertainment?
So I think games can provide, and this is my personal opinion. I think this varies from each different person kind of that works in games, but I think for me and for a lot of other people, it's that games are kind of an interactive way of conveying emotions or thoughts or even just like long lasting memories. I don't necessarily think every game needs to be super serious or about an entirely serious subject matter, but they should at least leave players with something that sticks with them. I feel like whether that's like an emotional connection where it's like how I still have just an emotional connection of just being able to bond with my brothers growing up playing Smash Brothers, or if it's something that's more more authored and like trying to like have a discussion with your players, like even games like Journey or other like or Inside, where those are very carefully crafted narrative kind of experiences. Um, I think games provide a really unique opportunity for players to kind of feel like they're in those worlds and experiencing those things that some other genres can't really provide or do in the same way.
Okay. And that brings us to the conclusion of this particular episode of the Pumpkin Copter Cast. I'd like to thank Cam Riach of Serenity Forge for joining me today. And for those of you interested on the King's Bird, it is currently on Steam for 1999 American or whatever your equivalent is in the part of the world you live in. And yes, there will be a link to the King's Bird Steam page for those of you who want to check it out. If the -7 people listening to this actually enjoyed this, feel free to like and subscribe. You can follow me on the Twitters, though I'm not sure why you would, and follow Serenity Forge on the Twitters to keep up to date with everything they're doing. So, yes, this has been the Pumpkin Copter Cast, a good old podcast about video games, and we hope to see you later.